Okay, let's talk about secondary goals. The idea here is whenever we are pursuing a primary goal, we always have, or we are very likely to have a secondary goal, which would put restrictions on the pursuit of the primary goals and affect how we carry out our primary goals. So we call the secondary pull goals because these secondary goals act as a counter force to primary goals, restrain you from pursuing the primary goals in a simple and direct way. So get back to the example of borrowing Mike's car. Technically, you could just say, hey, Mike, give me your car. You don't want to make the request in such a simple and direct way because you have several secondary goals to address. For example, you don't want to look rude, you are managing your images, and you don't want to ruin the relationship with Mike, etc. So all these concerns, we call them secondary goals. And these secondary goals would affect the way we communicate our primary goals. So let's talk about what kind of secondary goals we could have. Some of you just mentioned, I don't want to look like a rude person, I want to be a polite and kind person. So that is the first type of secondary goals, identity concerns. So these identity concerns arise from people's principles and values. And because of these identity standards or principles, I'm gonna hold some kind of norms or standards for myself. And all the conversations, all the communication I engage in will not violate this standard I hold for myself. We call it identity concerns. The second type of secondary goal we have here is conversational management. So in other words, I want to manage our conversation to make sure it goes smoothly. Both Mike and I are happy. We are pleasant, and the conversation is managed in a smooth way. That is a conversational management. The last one we have this here is relational concerns. That is, I want to value the relationship, the friendship with Mike. I don't want to ruin this friendship. So let's say if I kind of make the request in a rude way, probably this will hurt Mike's feeling. And eventually our friendship will suffer. So because of this concern, I want to make the request in a more polite and strategic way. And these are the three types of secondary goals we could have. So I'm going to ask you guys to go back to this before sunrise, this train scene, and take a look of Jesse, his secondary goals. So in last exercise, we identified Jesse's primary goals in this conversation. And take another look of this video and think about it, whether Jesse addresses those secondary goals or not in this conversation. Please take a look and answer this question. Okay, so welcome back. Well, if you kind of watched this video, you can tell that actually Jesse, he made 2 tries. For his first try, he didn't address any of those secondary goals. He was making this request in a super direct, super straightforward way. And of course, this would kind of, trigger some uncomfortable feelings from Celine. And he gave it another try. So for his second try, he was making this request in a more strategic, indirect, and humorous way. And finally, he made it. So for his second try, he apparently addressed those secondary goals. So if you have a clear understanding of these 3 secondary goals, let's do this continue our second journal entry. So here is a prompt. Think back about the conversation you just wrote on the paper and answer the following question. Did you address any secondary goals in the conversation? If yes, what are those secondary goals addressed by you? Okay, so finally, I want to make a few notes before we leave goals and move on to plans. So the first one is that the way we label them, primary and secondary goals, should not be taken to imply that the primary goals are more important than secondary goals. They do not mean that borrowing Mike's car is more important than maintaining a friendship with Mike, right? So in other words, primary and secondary goals only refer to the functions and directional forces of the goals rather than their importance. And sometimes the secondary goals can become primary goals and define the interaction. Let me share a typical conversation with you guys. So my husband, he's really, lazy and a messy guy. And sometimes he could make our place very dirty and disorganized, very messy. So I will complain about it. And sometimes if I'm being too mean, and he would feel really upset and heartbroken. At this moment, I realized, I need to say something good to him to save our relationship. So from this time spot, my primary goal has shifted from persuading him or asking him to do the cleaning work to managing our relationship, comforting him and saving his face. So in this situation, again, we can see that the primary goal and secondary goal shift their places, and the secondary goal becomes primary in this conversation. Okay, so that is all the information, all the things I want to talk about regarding this first component, goals. Let's move on to the second one, plans. So plans, by definition, are our cognitive representations of the behaviors that are intended to achieve this goal. Say, I ask you guys to conceive a potential conversation in your mind to make this date happen. So plan refers to the conversation you plot in your mind. So to make this date happen, how are you gonna make it happen? Are you gonna be super direct, such as I have a crush on you, you should go out with me for that? Or are you gonna be strategic, such as, you know what, there is a new movie, I heard it's really good, you should check out the movie with me. So we can see that the plan is a potential conversation you plot in your mind, as well as those logistic stuff you consider ahead of time to help you achieve this goal, such as whether you want to make the conversation happen in a public setting or you want to make it privately in case of being rejected. How are you gonna dress yourself to look pretty? And this plan is reflected through people's behaviors and verbal messages. And then what's the difference between plans and goals? The primary difference is that plan provides a means to achieving a goal. So if you got a plan, you must have a goal in your mind ahead of it. But if you have a goal, it does not necessarily yield a plan for lots of reasons, such as this goal is too hard to achieve. This goal becomes less important, you've got other priorities, etc. So that's the difference between plans and goals. And plans can differ in how simple or complex they are. And there are two factors deciding the complexity level of a plan. There are number of contingencies and specificity. Let's take a look at these two factors one by one. First, the plan complexity is associated with the number of contingencies that one plan has. So what does contingency mean? One contingency represents one attempt to deal with events that might interfere with the successful achievement of your goals. Well, this definition sounds really complicated, right? Let me put it into a simple way. Let's say when you make plans to achieve a goal, would you consider some situations where your first initial proposal got rejected? And in this situation, do you have a backup option? We often hear people talking about the plan B and the plan C, and actually, such a backup option represents one contingency. And the more contingencies you got in your plan, the more complex your plan is. Again, one contingency actually represents one backup option in case your first proposal got rejected. Let me give you a concrete example. So let's say this summer, let's assume that we don't have this coronavirus situation. So me and my husband, we want to invite my father to go to New York City for a summer trip with us. But my father, he is totally a homebody and he just wants to stay at home. So both me and my husband, we want to persuade my father to go with us. We got a plan to kind of achieve this persuasion purpose. So we want to present something really good we could do in New York City to attract my father. Both of us want to start with this Empire State Building. So my plan is really complex. So I would first approach my father and say, hey, you know what? We could get on top of this Empire State Building and have a really nice view of this city. And in case my father says, well, I have an acrophobia, I don't want to get that tall. I have a plan B, which is, that is okay, we could check out the Liberty Statue. And in case my father says, I don't want to be on a boat, I have plan C, the Times Square, and also plan D, which is the Metropolitan Museum. So you can see that my plan is really complex because I've got lots of backup options, contingencies in my plan in case my first proposal got rejected. Whereas my husband's plan is very simple, and if my father says I have an acrophobia, I don't want to go to the Empire State Building, and he would get stuck there and decides, well, I have nothing else to offer. Again, my husband's plan is totally a joke. It's very simple because it lacks contingencies. So that's the first factor deciding the plan complexity. Let's move on to the second one, the specificity. That is how detailed your plan is. To what extent do you work out all those details of your plan? So the more detailed your plan is, the more complex your plan is. So finally, let's say we decide we want to turn out my father, he's an art person. So we want to check out the Metropolitan Museum and for our New York City trip. So for this day's trip to the Metropolitan Museum, I will work out all the details of my plan. So again, my plan is really complex because I will do lots of research ahead of time and I will work out all the details of my plan, such as at what time we're gonna leave the hotel and which metro line we're gonna take and what kind of specific things we're gonna do in the Metropolitan Museum. Whereas my husband's plan is very simple because it's super vague, has no details worked out. If you ask him what we're gonna do in the Metropolitan Museum, his answer would be, let's just have fun in Match. So very vague, very abstract, nothing concrete, no details at all. That's the second factor deciding the plan complexity level. So we've talked about these two factors deciding the plan complexity level. A more important question for us to consider is how these two factors affect the message effectiveness. I got to stop here because there is a time limit for me to record a lecture, which is 50 minutes. So I'll see you guys in next video, in next lecture.